Hello, everyone. We are at the top of the hour, so I'm going to kick things off right away here. First, to thank you all for joining us this afternoon. For those of you I have not met, I'm Lauren Mackey, Wisconsin Territory Manager for Herman Miller. I work alongside Carol Seisey and BSI as they support you in all the things that you do. Joining me and us today is my colleague, Ryan Anderson. Ryan is Vice President of Digital Innovation for Herman Miller, and he has some excellent content to share with you all around managing projects remotely. So a couple of housekeeping things here. All attendees are automatically on mute, but we don't want anyone to be shy. So please do ask questions. We ask that you utilize the Q&A function of Zoom. You can find that at the bottom of our meeting window, and I'll be monitoring that to get questions over to Ryan as we go. And with that, Ryan, I will turn it over to you.
Awesome, thank you, I appreciate it. Hey everyone, greetings from Grand Rapids, Michigan, so east over the lake. Glad to be able to spend some time with you. I want to thank Lauren and the team from BSI, and I'm excited to talk about one of the things that I'm probably most passionate about, which is what does it look like to really work effectively remotely. BSI has a tagline you've probably seen that says reinvent the way you work, and of course typically we like to work with them between Herman Miller and BSI to think about the spaces, the office spaces, healthcare, higher education in which you might work on a daily basis. But today we're going to be talking about what does it look like to work remotely across time and space. Just in the way of a little bit of history, I lead some of the digital innovation efforts at Herman Miller. Most of the projects I run are remote. I have a group of collaborators around the world. In fact, I've got a project right now that I'm working on where we've got folks in Sweden and Beirut and Mexico and the US, and we've been working together for 6 months, and I think we've only been in the same space one day. So I love talking about this. I think right now, given the COVID-19 crisis, we can all be learning new ways of doing things that are really good, really effective to help us be more productive long-term. So I'm going to share my screen. I will share my desktop, and remote meetings, as great as they are sometimes glitchy. So if anybody has any sort of issues with what's going on, just let me know, and feel free, BSI team or Herman Miller team, to unmute and jump right in, because I will not be seeing the chat window while I'm sharing my desktop. But I'll take us through some content, basically some best practices that Herman Miller has gathered over the years, and I'll leave an ample amount of time at the end for us to be able to do Q&A. So at any point, friends, if you've got some sort of question, some sort of thought, some sort of best practice, because hey, I want to learn too, just put it in that Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. And we'll make sure we spend ample time. I also just want to recognize that I think we've got quite a few different types of jobs represented on the call. There's some folks in architecture and interior design, some folks in facilities and real estate. There's folks that work at BSI, at Herman Miller. My goal is to try to help all of you. So I won't get super specific in terms of job function, but if you've got specific things that you want to talk about, don't hesitate to ask. Okay? So a little bit of background. I won't spend much time here, but believe it or not, Herman Miller's been looking into how technology impacts the way we work for a very long time. Back in 1968, when Stanford showed the world the first personal computer. This is years before the first Mac came out in 1984. This was 1968. Herman Miller partnered with them to create the first environment for personal computing, the first mouse pad for the first mouse, the first monitor arm for the first monitor. Our goal throughout all of those years has been the same. We like to stay very close with leaders in the technology world to understand how the technology is impacting work and workplace. And then that informs our products. It informs the application of those products. In some cases, we might even develop digital technological products. But most of the time, we just want to stay on top of it. In recent years, we've worked with Skype and Logitech and Google and Crestron and a whole host of others. I got a chance to lead a partnership with the head of user experience at Skype in 2014 and 15, just focused on how do you support virtual work. It was super cool experience. And so The learnings I'm sharing today, I don't want to be theoretical. I want them to be super practical, but they are based in a fair amount of research and my own personal experience. So let me start with this. If you find yourself somebody who used to do a lot of your coordination or your work with your coworkers co-located in some sort of facility, and now everybody's been working for a few weeks separately, and you're struggling with how do we make this work over the long haul, I'll introduce a foundational principle, which is processes that work normally when you're all together often don't just immediately translate into being virtual. They need to be redesigned. So I'll just give you a personal anecdote. I was listening earlier today to my 13-year-old's teacher who gave a video lesson where they wanted them to do an activity that was just like they would do it in class, but it would have taken just like 4 or 5 hours, which is really, really difficult to ask of a 13-year-old or a 46-year-old to do. And so it's just another example of, well, there may be a way you used to have done things, but you kind of need to reinvent it, rethink it, redesign it, deconstruct it, and reconstruct it. And that's the best starting point. So if we just dive in, and let's say we were working on some facilities project where we've got a redo of a space next year, and we were using the same processes that we always have when we were in the office, but now we're trying to do it virtually, you might find that things are feeling disjointed and that there's things falling through the crack, and that maybe even your team dynamic has shifted a little bit. That's okay. It's just a normal process of having to go through this redesign, and we're going to walk a little bit through what that looks like. I think mapping the successful conclusion to a project. So if you're in sales, it's the win. If you're in design, maybe it's releasing those construction documents. If you're in facilities, maybe it's cutting the ribbon on that new headquarters, whatever it is, thinking about it from the end and working backwards and establishing some sort of role clarity and some sort of dynamic way of managing these processes is key. So let me tell you a little bit about where to begin. And in the time we've got, this won't be exhaustive, but I hope this gets you off on the right path. I suggest that you or anyone else on the team that says, hey, I want to step up and help lead this. And when I say lead this, I don't mean be the boss. I mean, help figure out what these virtual processes should look like. Begin with these steps. Number one, championing your virtual team culture. We'll get into each of these, but the idea here is that you may have a group of collaborators that you've worked with for 20 years, and you've got great trust relationships and you know how you do things. Don't be surprised if the dynamic changes when you're all working remotely. It's because our communication changes, and so much of our communication is nonverbal. And when we see each other in the same space, there's kind of spontaneous points of connection. And sometimes that stuff just starts to break down when you're not all together. I'll tell you, even my closest collaborator, a friend of mine named Jeff within Herman Miller, he and I typically talk, I don't know, twice a day. There have been times where we've gone a week since we've started working entirely remotely, and we have to be mindful of, all right, we need to stay connected. So championing that team culture is the first part, even if it's an established team. The second, your tools, establishing the tools you're going to use for collaboration. I'm going to try to not get too geeky and techy on you here, but I am going to introduce you to some basic concepts around different types of tool sets that might work more effectively than others. Third, for those of you that need to share key updates with either internal or external stakeholders, maybe you're head of real estate and you're talking to the CFO, or maybe you're in sales and you're talking to the client, knowing what to do on video and how to approach video interactions, there's a little bit of an art to it. And I'm not perfect by any means, but I'll share with you a few best practices. And then finally, managing process effectiveness. If you're the sort of person that is great at managing processes, and typically you're thinking about time and resources, well, now you need to begin shifting and really doing a very close monitoring of what is or is not effective. And it's just a little bit different shift. I think you're going to find that you spend a lot more of your time communicating rather than doing, but we're going to get into all of these. So let's dive right in. And again, because I'm not checking the chat function or Q&A, Herman Miller, BSI team, if you need to interrupt at any point, that won't offend me at all, but we will spend about 15 minutes towards the tail end doing Q&A.
We are good so far, Ryan. Thank you.
You're awesome. Thank you. Every video platform is different. Sometimes you can really easily monitor, other times less so. In this case, because I'm sharing my desktop, all I'm seeing is my content. Okay, so championing virtual team culture. And that's really what I want to get at here is every organization, every team has a culture. It has a way of relating to each other and a way of doing things. And the way you do things virtually tends to be different, at least in some ways, than the way you would do it if you were co-located. So someone needs to step up. In the slide, I said the leader, but once again, it doesn't have to be the boss. It just has to be somebody who says, I will help to make this work, and really be the glue. And communication is key. When I say communication, I'm not just referring to talking or updating. I'm talking about listening and being aware of what's going on. Communication in the most holistic sense, understanding each other. How is everyone doing? And I think it's critical that we acknowledge right from the get-go that this is not business as usual. Even for me, I mean, while I work mostly remotely, probably 4 days a week in a typical week, this isn't the same, right? We've got kids trying to learn, we've got relatives we're caring for, we've got grocery runs and all sorts of other stuff in the midst of a quarantine or semi-quarantine. We are working through a pandemic, which is crazy to say, but that's the situation here. So we just need to do our best. And I think people want to feel productive, but they also need to keep their lives in order. And so just be super sensitive to personal duress. A lot of people won't, in these sort of situations, share it remotely when they're really struggling. They'll just put on a happy face during the meetings and then have to go deal with the stress in their lives. And that not only is that not good for the team, it's also not sustainable from a productivity standpoint. And that's what we're shooting for, sustainable productivity. How can you be productive and accomplish stuff while still maintaining some balance and some health throughout the course of this? I do think social times are important. It's a little bit of a cliche that people will do Zoom happy hours, et cetera. But if you've never done one, they're pretty effective. So whatever you might normally do, if it's Judy's 13th anniversary with the company and you would normally have time for donuts and coffee, you got to do that. Donuts and coffee on Zoom. Tell Judy you love her and that you're appreciative of her. Those sort of moments are even more important when a sense of isolation tends to kick in, because everyone's got a different experience now. Some of us are surrounded by chaos. Some of us are in small apartments by ourselves for an extended period of time. So monitor the health of the group, both in terms of individuals and just how the dynamic is going. Next, let's talk about tool sets. And I'm going to spend a little bit more time here. And I said I wasn't going to get geeky on you, but I want to introduce you to a basic framework for collaboration tools and the difference between synchronous collaboration tools and asynchronous collaboration tools. So synchronous tools are just those that you use at the same time. Right now, we're on a Zoom meeting. That is a synchronous collaboration tool. The meeting function within Microsoft Teams, FaceTime, phone calls, anything that you do at the same time would be synchronous. And they can be very useful. In this case, we all don't know each other, so you're getting to know me a little bit. I'm trying to be of service to you. We're talking about the same content together. This makes total sense. Or if you're scheduling time with the team to see how everyone's doing, how's the process going? Tell us what you're thinking. Synchronous tools are great. The trouble is they're demanding. They're demanding of people's time, particularly when you got a bunch of other stuff going on. And they're demanding because they require you to be really present. So if there's other things going on, if your boss is blowing up your email with text or with emails or your phone with texts, or there's some sort of project deadline, you have to get in by 3 o'clock, being overscheduled into any sort of synchronous collaborative interaction can be extremely demanding. And some of you may have seen that there's been a fair amount of press just in the last week or two about something that is known as video fatigue or Zoom fatigue. Being on video for long periods of time is really tough. At my best, I can usually do 3 or 4 hours a day. But that's when there's nothing else on my calendar and I can spend a little bit of time in between getting stuff done. And so the way that you reduce those demands and speed up your process, that's the key, is by using asynchronous tools. So this would include Slack. Slack is probably the best known one, but the Google Suite, when it came out, whatever it was, 10 years ago, and we started to see students in college collaborating on documents without ever being in the same room. It just is any sort of tool where when you have 15 minutes or you have an hour, you can go focus on it, and it builds people's interactions over time. So most of us have done this in some form or fashion. Email is kind of an asynchronous collaboration tool, but it's not very collaborative. But if you've ever had even just a PowerPoint or a Microsoft Word document that somebody updates, they send it to you and you update it, that's a pretty crude way of doing it. But these platforms like the G Suite, like Slack, Microsoft Teams, not the meeting function, but the other functions, Basecamp, Asana, there's a whole bunch. And those tools represent such a great advantage over other tools, because when you allow people to contribute when they have a few minutes, it helps to deal with time zone issues, it helps to deal with chaotic schedules, and you will find that once you're in the habit of using them, that things really cruise along. I mentioned that I've got this global initiative with some external collaborators, because many of them are in Europe. When I wake up in the morning, which by the way seems to get later and later in quarantine, I'm noticing that my bedtime keeps shifting out, but that's another story. When I wake up in the morning and I hop on Slack, it's like, holy cow, there's 3 or 4 hours worth of work there, and I can catch up and see what the conversation's all about and add to it. It's just a way of going fast and being effective. So I'm gonna show you a couple of quick screenshots of those if those products are new to you. Other platforms worth knowing, Trello, I love Trello. It's like virtual Post-it notes. It can be used synchronously, but I think it's even better asynchronously. By the way, Wharton School of Business at University of Pennsylvania did an exercise a while back on collaborative brainstorming. They tried a synchronous process where they brought everybody in the same room and said, we need you to come up with new ideas. And then they tried an asynchronous process where they said, everybody think of some new ideas, and then we'll get together and talk about them. They found that that asynchronous process was, by their estimates, 2.5 times more effective in terms of the quality of the ideas and the number of the ideas. So I think I'm obviously a little bit biased towards the effectiveness of it, but Trello, if you've never tried it, is a great tool for managing to-do lists or anything else you might normally use with like Post-it notes. Mural and Miro, I don't use those as much. Those are basically whiteboarding sort of products. There's also others, Bluebeam, which is more specific to like design processes and others. I don't know them as well, but there are definitely just an amazing suite of tools out there, most of which can be just used off the cloud. And some of them are what's known as a premium or freemium, model where you can log in for free. The challenge with that is they do represent potentially some security concerns. So if you work for an organization that has an IT team that says, well, don't just go grab anything off the web, which ours is the same, it's understandable. I personally greatly prefer using tools that are already in use. So if you've got a platform that, you've used it a little bit, excuse me, I might need to go get a glass of water. One of those things on video that happens. Then if you've already used that platform, you'll find that it's so much easier just to help people use those advanced features. And so I like to schedule time for people to play a little bit. Hey, we're gonna use Trello this week, or we're gonna use Microsoft Teams. And if it's new to you, let's have everybody get on it for an hour and try it and play around in a way that doesn't create any sort of issues with you, like interrupting our project, right? It's easy to play if you know that you can goof around and not screw up somebody's work. But if you're using it for the first time, you don't want it to be a high stakes situation. Excuse me 1 second while I grab a glass of water. Thank you.
Go right ahead. The realities of video world, right?
I felt a cough coming on.
I know.
And then I thought,
No
oh God, what is that? And now I feel better. Thank you.
Good.
Okay, cool. Let me give you a screenshot of what I've done basically as a fake team on Microsoft Teams. This is one of those asynchronous collaboration platforms. Teams is a little interesting because basically Microsoft kind of combined the function of Zoom and the function of Slack into one platform. So I'm showing the more asynchronous platform here. And I use this with a group within Herman Miller, actually, to try to explain how we might work with a given customer. So, it could be your project, you can make it your own, but if you look at the left, where I put Acme Corporation headquarters redo, that was hypothetical. So I created that team, and then I created some channels underneath it, or you can think of these as different topics. So general would just be like, anything you want to share with the team. I, created these customer interactions, like, hey, what kind of interactions have we had with the customer? Keep the team updated. Installation estimates, product selection, RFP response coordination, team project updates. These are the sort of things you could imagine if you work at Herman Miller or BSI. We do this stuff all the time. But for each of your organizations, it might be different. But think about it. Like, what kind of conversations would you love to be able to monitor and keep track of and make sure that everyone knows where to go find that? And so what I did was I posted on the general channel, and I like to do this. Hey, everyone, welcome to this team. If you haven't done this before, here's what each of these things might be used for. And the reason I did this as a hypothetical is I want to invite people to this, and I want to let them play like we just talked about. So if they post some GIF or they make some funny comment, it's low stakes. They're not going to screw anything up. They're not going to accidentally alert someone to something that isn't actually happening. Slack, if you've ever used it, very similar. Now, I didn't create this. This is just a screenshot from, I think, Slack's website. Same sort of dynamic, where on the left, there's these different topics. In this case, the hypothetical one they've said here is a marketing team. And they've created these channels that say design criteria, design team. And within each of them, people are interacting. So very similar. And what's interesting about these sort of platforms is if you have somebody jump into the project a week from now or several months from now, they can actually go back. They can see the conversation. If a document has been posted or created, it's there, as well as the comments or the edits on it. It's a great way, particularly if you've got shifting team members on a given project, to keep pace. There's also a quick screenshot of Trello here. Basically, the way Trello works is you create these little cards. So you can see the one on the left that says team resources, and then you organize them into these different lanes. So in this case, it says team info, current projects, completed projects. Again, this is just a screenshot of a template that I took off Trello's website. But the idea here is that you could organize these by work in process, things completed, new ideas, and then any team member can not only sort the cards, like they can move them from left to right or whatever, they can click on them, click what's been done, update it with new information. So it's really a matter of you deciding, all right, if I'm establishing a tool set for our team to collaborate, what will be most effective for us? Which ones are we already familiar with? And then choose one and give the team a chance to just get to know them a little bit, because it's also really high pressure just to suddenly find yourself like, all right, everyone, we're doing this on Monday. You need to update this. I like to ease people into it, but boy, are they effective. Okay, so that's a little bit about those asynchronous platforms and how they can be helpful. Let's talk a little bit about video and how to not choke if you don't have access to a glass of water on video, and what it means to have professional video interactions. The screenshot on the left, you probably are familiar. This poor guy was on a BBC interview, Skype interview a year or two ago. His kids busted in the room, and then his wife, and he was just struggling so much to know what to do with it. And that happens. Video is it's a weird medium. As I've already said, I recommend that it's not overused, but instead that it's used for key moments of connection. Here's how I think you can maximize your success there. First, really think about the remote experience. What are they seeing? What are they hearing? The benefit of video is what we talked about before, which is the nonverbals. You can see someone's body language. You can kind of make eye contact. You can connect in ways that are difficult to just over an audio call or over Teams or Slack. And so one principle is, if you got a lot going on in your house and there's chaos, try to get the chaos in front of you instead of behind you like this guy faced. So for me, I'm fortunate to have a spare bedroom. I'm in a home office. I have a sit-stand desk, which is awesome to be able to have access to. I've moved the desk away from the wall, and I've positioned myself in between the desk and the wall. That way the camera's pointing at the wall, and whatever's going on in front of me, I can see, but you necessarily can't. So on a given day, I might have, like my son walked in earlier, he needed a little bit of help with homework. I was kind enough to have somebody bring me a glass of water who heard that I was joking. It could be anything. And this principle is true if you're working from the kitchen table, you know, wherever you might be. Because if there's stuff going on, it's so uncomfortable for you when people can see behind you, but you can't manage it. But if you see that it's in front of you, then you can easily step away. And you saw me do it before, but it's like stepping away from a video interaction, it's not that weird. It's just like going to get a cup of coffee or using the restroom or whatever. And so I will frequently, if I need to, just say, excuse me a moment, and go deal with whatever is going on in life and come back. The other distraction, other than the visual distraction, are audio distractions. And so, you know, we face this. We've got a noisy dog. The other day I was on a webinar, and one of my kids started playing their recorder, which if you've never had a child playing a recorder while you're on a webinar, it's quite an experience. And so in that case, you might find that certain types of microphones can be helpful. There are headsets from companies like Logitech. Some of them are real affordable that have noise cancellation options that basically cancel out anything that's not at voice frequency. In fact, years ago, when we were doing that work with Microsoft, I'll never forget, I was using a headset like this, and somebody was cooking and our smoke alarm started to go off, and I apologized. Hey, so sorry about all the background noise. And they said, all we can hear is you, man, because those microphones are pretty effective. So if that's your world, if you live in a place where there's just all sorts of background noise that prevent you from being comfortable, one of those headsets is really good. Couple of other tips, and I chose a stock image here of this guy is just using his laptop, but that would be a particularly poor video interaction as well, because there's a couple other things that I recommend. One, ideally don't have the laptop too far down. You want eye contact. That's the whole goal of video. And so if you can raise that laptop up about 10 inches off of a standard size desk, it helps a lot. Now, in my case, I'm fortunate to have a Renew sit-stand desk, so I actually use my height adjustability feature all day long. Most of it's not for standing, most of it's for video. So like right now, I've got it moved up. If it were moved down and I turned on the camera, you might be looking at my nose or at the ceiling, which isn't a great feeling. Some laptops, and I don't know why this is, some laptops actually have the camera on the bottom of the monitor. Those are particularly challenging, so get that laptop up if you can, and it'll prevent you from multitasking and goofing around on the keyboard during your video call. Bright lighting. Ideally, it should be in front of you, not behind you or above you. Very bright windows, if they're behind you, will force the camera to darken you, which makes you look like you're in witness protection program. Sometimes if you have very bright lights above you, it creates circles under your eyes, kind of like a raccoon. So in this case, in my home office, I've got a window to my left. I brought in a couple of floor lamps on my right, just to add a little bit of extra lighting so it doesn't look weird. And then for any key presentation, like if you're presenting to the CFO, you're presenting to the client, rehearse your video calls just like you would anything else, and be mindful of nonverbals. So if one of your colleagues is presenting and you're there with a furrowed brow and your arms crossed, like people can see that. So the benefit of it, of course, is nonverbals, but you got to be mindful of it as well. All right, quick time check, 2:30, we're doing great.
Hey, Ryan.
2:30 Eastern time, yes.
Yes, Eastern time. Freaked us all out.
Sorry, I'm in Michigan. Do you have a question?
Yeah, a quick comment just from me that I think there is a special place in heaven for parents who are in quarantine with recorders. Wow,
Oh.
that sounds sounds really, really awful. But a quick question, is it, you know, since we're talking about video interactions and the Zoom fatigue, is it socially acceptable to kind of set that expectation, this is a video call or this will not be a video call, and should we be doing that up front?
Oh, I think so. Yeah, great question. I know there's a lot of people uncomfortable on video, and I don't think you should have to be on video if you're not just feeling up to it. So I think the leader can say, hey, if you can be on video, great. If you're not comfortable with it, don't worry about it. Or just don't join that way. I have this a lot where normally we'll have video meetings with teammates. Sometimes somebody joins without it. Everybody understands. Either they're not looking their best, they're not feeling their best, there's something else going on. I don't think people should feel pressured to do that. I do think it's very useful for the group leader or whoever schedules the meeting to actually say that and to let everyone know. But no, I don't think people should feel forced to be on video. Yeah, great question.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll take that even a step farther, which is I think given everything going on, people should feel comfortable saying, there are some times when I may not be able to join all those calls, right? So as I mentioned, we have kids, they range from 10 to 16. We've had our fair share of meltdowns. Online learning, being cut off from your friends, your family, I mean, it is super stressful. And there are just times where I think it's nice to be able to say, hey, I will be a part of these meetings as much as I can, but there's just times where other priorities have got to come first. Now, as I've mentioned, if it's a critical meeting, then you got to make time for it, but we've just all got to give each other a lot of grace. Great question. Any other questions before I move on video that have come through?
That's it for now.
Okay. Friends, don't be hesitant to put Q&A into that box because we're getting towards the end here in about another 5 or 10 minutes. Okay, process effectiveness. I touched upon this earlier, and I got to tell you, I am not really a detailed process person. I am so thankful for those in the world that are like great program managers. But for me, and really for a lot of us at Herman Miller, we use what's called the RACI model, which is just a way of divvying up who's responsible, accountable, et cetera. Whatever model you use, it is really helpful to establish role clarity early on and to be a little bit more intentional about it than you might normally. As I said before, sometimes teams get in a groove. You all kind of know what each other's doing, but you all have the chance to like interact with each other. And so in this case, it's not a bad thing to say, okay, are we really clear? Who's doing what? Who's updating this? Do we know what the deadlines are? And to be overly intentional, I guess I'll say about it. If it's a first time doing all this remotely, I think there's value in breaking the process down into very achievable steps, particularly in the first couple of weeks. Almost to the point where the team might say, well, we would normally get more than that done. You say, it's okay. Let's just make sure that we're cruising along here. Like, let's just really start in a very effective way so we can feel like we're building some success. We're getting into these new habits, and then we'll dial things up. Because even if the shelter-at-home orders throughout the country lift in the next week or two, I think the reality is, and the best available data indicates, that a lot of people will still continue to work remotely. If people are heading back to the office, not everyone might head back. And people are just learning that these tools are available and they're pretty effective. And so think about it as the long play, right? How do we start slowly but get really, really good at this? Definitely determine a clear, visible place to manage progress. So whether that's in Teams or Slack or Trello or something else, any team member at any point should be able to say, how are we doing? What am I responsible for? And how can I update everyone? And how's everybody else doing in terms of what they were trying to do? Having that simple, clear destination is super helpful.
Hey, Ryan,
yeah.
Sorry to jump in. We did have a question. Could you break down the RACI model, please?
Yes.
But we did have a question come through.
And actually, I can describe it, but sometimes it's nice to visualize it. I didn't actually pull up an example of it. I saw Carol was on earlier. If you've got the actual model, we can do that in the Q&A. But basically, it's who's responsible. So that would be like, I'm leading this process. Who's accountable for various different things, who's consulted, and who's informed. So it may be a situation where there's an executive who's ultimately responsible for making sure that something gets done, but maybe she's not going to be super in the weeds on it. And so there's somebody else that's accountable who's going to drive that day-to-day work. Consulted are those people that should have a voice in the process. And then who's informed is often just keeping everybody else in the organization that might have a hand in this, particularly if the project is kind of like getting into other people's areas, keeping them in the loop. And we found that it's a pretty effective model for a whole host of things. It could be product development, could be sales, et cetera. It's not the only way of organizing it. It's just a way of, once again, making those kind of assumptions explicit around who's doing what. And then within the accountable, there actually could be a whole bunch of stuff. It could be that there's 12 different things that need to get done in the course of this project, and individuals are responsible for certain components of it. But yeah, we've found it helpful. Anything to add from any of my Herman Miller BSI folks on RACI? I use it, but like I said, I am not a program manager, so I'm very thankful for my colleagues that really work on this every single day.
No, that's great. We did get the model out there. Thank you. And I will just add to that by saying, I mean, it's a simple little tool, but when you level set at the beginning of a project, you kind of, if you've ever started a project and you didn't have those roles figured out, it's a little bit of a slow start. And when this is done right on the upfront, everyone knows where they're going, and you get off to a really efficient start. So
yeah,
I recommend.
I'll just add that different organizations they vary in terms of how hierarchical they are. So in some situations, your organization might be very top down, where there's a leader for everything. They have a lot of authority over who does what. Others might be less so. I don't want to stereotype here, but if I think about Herman Miller, I think about architecture, interior design firms, et cetera, they tend to be maybe a little flatter, a little bit more collaborative in terms of kind of being organic. The challenge is sometimes it's unclear, particularly if you're not in the same space looking at a big project wall or something, who's doing what. And so if you find that when I said that, your gut says, oh, that's our organization, finding some sort of model for saying, all right, can we just document and recognize who's doing what, might feel a little bit artificial, but it actually is super helpful.
Absolutely.
Cool. All right, a few more points on process effectiveness. Daily gut checks. I think it's really, really useful if whoever is leading the project, or really if even all team members, can just take a time each day to say, okay, so how are we doing? Are there people on the team that might not be being heard? You know, they're having a tough time voicing what they think about the project. Are we going too fast? Are we going too slow? Who might be experiencing burnout? Now, this is an interesting one, and I've gotten the chance to write a little bit about remote work and be part of some consortiums over the years. There's been this long-standing kind of stereotype, unfortunately, that people working from home or remote workers might be slacking off, watching Netflix. I gotta tell you, I think in my experience, the opposite is true. And most of us are experiencing it now. When you're working remotely, the work is right there in your home, and drawing that line between trying to balance work and life is always difficult, let alone now. And so part of that gut check, I think, needs to be just asking, like, is there anybody who we might find is burning the candle at both ends? Are you getting emails at midnight from somebody, as an example? Every once in a while, cool. If that starts to become like the norm, and that's the way they're trying to deal with this, the challenge gets back to what we talked about earlier. Can you be sustainably productive? Because burning everyone out in the first month or two, and then having people that are really disengaged it's not where people want to end. All right, one more point. Celebrate and learn. I find that one of the things, unfortunately, that goes by the wayside with remote work is the chance just to enjoy a little bit of celebratory moment. Like, hey, we did it. And it's not just at the end of a project, it's those key little milestones along the way. And so taking time to say, you know what? So proud, everybody. Thank you so much. Or we tried this and it didn't work, but we adjusted and we're getting back on track. Even being willing to celebrate trying something that doesn't work out. It's important. But the ultimate question is, how is all of this building a better you as an employee and you as an organization? So if you find that you're part of an organization where there's lots of different teams trying different processes to manage remote work, get together now and then, or start a Slack channel or a Teams channel and say, hey, what's working, what's not? What programs are you finding really helpful? What processes or new protocols are you finding just make everything work better than others? Because ultimately what you're doing is you're building this really, really helpful and competitive competency that if you embrace this and everyone gets in a rhythm, you can then say at whatever point you think is appropriate, not, okay, we're done with this, but what's that new sustainable normal? I will say that one of the interesting things about the situation we're in right now from a remote working standpoint is that technologically in some ways this is ideal. And I hesitate to say that because our life situation is not ideal. But what I mean is each person, one camera, one laptop or desktop, different locations. That's a little bit easier than 4 people in a room, 6 people in different locations on the fly, which is what we'll probably be faced with again in the near future. And so when it comes time for that, I would just tell you that it's good to have a conversation among the team to say, okay, when some of us are co-located again, and it may be that it varies from week to week, that there's some people in the office, there's some that aren't. What have we learned in terms of using these tools to make sure that we're always communicating, that decisions aren't being made in hallways instead of on Teams, that people don't suddenly feel like it's a liability to be remote when there's other people that are co-located. And that's probably the journey that we'll all be facing here in a matter of months, hopefully, because this situation where everyone is remote is a little bit unusual and probably not what will happen over the long run. So I hope that gives you a few starting places. My recommendation would be, chances are you've probably heard some stuff and you've said, okay, we do that really well. There's other areas where you think, you know what, that could be something that we could do better. Happy to make this content available to you. Happy to be a resource to you. I mean, it's our goal to serve you. And so if you've heard anything today where you said, you know what, I think if our organization started doing that, we would be much more effective. I'd encourage you to have that conversation internally. And if you need support, hey, I mean, we're here to serve. All right.
Certainly, Ryan.
Cool. So what kind of additional questions, thoughts, best practices? It can be whatever you like. In fact, if it's okay, I'm going to stop sharing so I can see what's happening on the Zoom meeting and talk about anything that you might like to talk about.
So we did have a comment from Rachel just saying that everyone should, you know, given the current kind of overload that we all feel, everyone should be encouraged to express if they're feeling that burnout. If there's any silver lining to, you know, this pandemic situation, I think it's that we're all giving each other and ourselves a little bit of a break, right? Acknowledging that we're human and just trying to do the very best we can in this situation. I do have another question here. Ryan, have you heard of any data or come across any data on the fiscal impact or cost savings of going digital? I would imagine that organizations, just with the lack of travel alone, are seeing a huge financial savings. And do you think that, one way or the other, will that continue into the future?
Great question. Yeah, so the answer is yes. And I've seen that information for many, many years. In fact, I started working heavily on video, high definition video, back in maybe 2008. And this is back when Cisco and Polycom and others were really promoting what they were referring to as telepresence at the time. And we started seeing ROI calculators right away. They made some weird assumptions in terms of when people would travel or wouldn't travel. I think the early models suggested that people simply wouldn't travel anymore, and that's just not the case. What I think we've learned over the years, and you can kind of draw from long distance relationships, like personal relationships, romantic relationships as an example, is that teams can survive and even thrive in some cases working remotely. But when it's time to build trust, trust is gained through shared experiences. And so if the team is forming or there's any sort of conflict or there's just key moments, there's still that need to get together. And so every organization, every team is going to be a little bit different. But yeah, there are some models that have been updated, I think, nicely to talk about ultimate cost savings in travel. Some of them take into account additional speed. I will say that it's very difficult to quantify, but if you've got people working in different time zones, the digital available now allow you to work basically overall longer throughout the day in a way that's much more coordinated. So there's a lot of difficult things that you can't immediately assign a number to. The world of workplace wellness, I'm going to go on a weird side note here for a second. If you've ever
Take us
seen
with you.
a wellness program marketed and sold to an organization, they use something called VOI, value on investment, instead of ROI, which is just kind of a fancy little trick to say, hey, we're going to put numbers to what we think we can put numbers to, but then we're going to state different types of value that may not have an immediate number associated to it. And I think if we use that more holistic VOI, this way of working remotely has huge upside. You can use real estate more effectively. You can capture time zones better. You can recruit from almost anywhere. If you learn how to do this, your ability to recruit great talent from almost anywhere greatly expands. And so, tough to put a spreadsheet together that captures all that, but definitely the larger umbrella here would be considered digital transformation or digital innovation. And there are no shortage of consultancies out there talking about it. I know, because I get about 40 emails a day from these people. But yes, this is a one heck of a kickstart to organizational digital transformation if organizations hadn't started it before.
Excellent. Yeah, that is good news. Again, we don't know what the other side of this all looks like, but you've certainly given us a lot to think about. We did receive one question, whether or not this is recorded. And yes, Danielle, this is being recorded. And we will certainly send this out after, I think, to all registered attendees. I think that's the way that works. So stay tuned for that. No other questions here. I just want, a major thank you to Ryan and the BSI folks for pulling this all together. Please know that we are all resources to you. So if you have additional questions about this or how we can help you integrate this within your return to work plan, please don't hesitate to reach out. We will talk to you all soon and can't wait to see you someday soon.
I know. It's one of my favorite hotels anywhere in the world is the Iron Horse. If we were in Milwaukee, it would be drinks at the bar afterwards, but it'll have to wait for now.
Oh, someday we're gonna keep you to that.
Okay, deal.
The Derby at the Iron Horse next year. That'd be fantastic. Thank you all. Stay well, and we'll talk to you soon.
Hey, thanks everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.